Greetings. Glad that you can be with me today. I'm Steve Cole, pastor of the First Methodist Church in Oswego, Kansas, and the West Mineral Church in West Mineral, Kansas. Traveling between the two churches sometimes, I happen to see a lot of deer, and somebody got me this shirt that says, "Watch out for deer, dear." Yeah, there's a lot of deer out there between the two churches, but fortunately so far I haven't hit any, so that's a good thing. Today we're going to be looking at a sermon for March 26, 2023, and it's the story of Lazarus being brought back from the dead. From John chapter 11 verses 30, we're going to look at just part of the story, okay? Verses 32 to 45. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man from dying?" May God add a blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the understanding of his word. Well, we know the rest of the story, that Jesus, came to the tomb, had them roll the stone away, and he said, "Lazarus, come out," and Lazarus came out alive, right? We know the rest of the story. One time there was a man that had died, and his wish is that he would be immediately buried without embalming. So they had the funeral service right away and took him to the cemetery. And as the pallbearers were carrying the casket, they stumbled into a hole and dropped the casket. And it broke open, and the man started breathing and was alive, still alive. And they only thought he was dead. Well, 10 years went by. He went back home and went back. And about 10 years later, he died again, or at least died. And they again took him out to the cemetery in the coffin. And when they got there, the wife said, "Hey, watch out for that hole." Okay. Lazarus was dead. Of that there was no doubt. He had been dead for 4 days. And when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he heard about it, but he didn't do anything about it. And he even said to the disciples, "Lazarus has fallen asleep." And they said, "Well, surely if he's asleep, he'll get better." And he said, "No, you don't understand. Lazarus is dead." But he waited 4 days to go to where Lazarus was. And the people were still mourning his death. He had been laid in the tomb. Now, Jesus had brought other people back to life, but those, as far as we know, had only been dead for a little short period of time. And so, but Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. In most cases, when somebody, their heart stops beating or they stop breathing, they can be brought back, but they have to be done fairly quickly. It has to be done in a matter of minutes. We can't live without oxygen or, our heart beating for a very long period of time. Now, there's a few cases where someone's fallen into the ice and maybe made it for like 20 minutes or so because the body slows down, but that's a rare occasion. When I was in seminary, I had a part-time job working in a nursing home as a nurse's aide. And, death was something that we dealt with on a fairly regular basis. People, they died. Well, there was one lady that was confined to a wheelchair. She didn't talk, but she, was okay. Well, one day, the aides went in to check on her in her room and, get her for lunch or whatever. She was slumped over in her wheelchair, unresponsive. They took her pulse. Nothing. As far as they could tell, she wasn't breathing. No heartbeats. Went and got the nurse that was in charge. The nurse came down, checked her out, and sure enough, and she was we call it DNR, which is do not resuscitate. So no measures would be taken to try to bring her back, CPR or anything like that. So they went to the nurse's aides went to take her out of her wheelchair, put her in bed so that the funeral home could come and gather her up. And when they took her out of the wheelchair, she went, took a deep breath. Still alive. How about that? Well, the rest of the story is she lived for about another month or so. And again, this time, she didn't come back. But still, once in a while, those things happen. That we think somebody's dead, but they knew Lazarus was dead. Now, part of it, why did Jesus wait for 4 days? Well, part of the reason might be that Jewish understanding was that the spirit stayed with the body for 3 days. The spirit kind of lingered around with the body for 3 days, and then after 3 days, the spirit would go off. So Jesus is kind of demonstrating that even after 4 days, after those 3 days are up, he's still able to bring somebody back. And there was a lot of anxiety involved with this. Both Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, and a lot of the other people were sad at what had happened. And said, if only you had been here. Both Mary and Martha, both sisters, said the same thing to Jesus. If only you had been here, our brother would not have died. A lot of anxiety. And in the last couple of years, we've had a lot of anxiety over the whole COVID-19 thing. We're not as concerned about it as we were maybe earlier, but still, it's still around. There's still a little bit of anxiety, and it changed things for us. Things haven't been the same since. We're still dealing with some of the effects of what took place during that time. We think, if only, and we've all had known somebody, family member, friend, somebody that contracted COVID, and we may have even known somebody that died from it. That we've all in one way been affected by it in one way or the other. So if only that person hadn't gotten COVID. If only they had stayed away from this place, stayed away from that place. If only they'd worn a mask. There's some debate about that, I know. If only. Yeah, but we could say the same thing about cancer. If only they hadn't smoked all those years. Yeah, sometimes, but sometimes somebody gets cancer even if they weren't a smoker. If only they hadn't been in Vietnam and been exposed to Agent Orange. I've known some people that, contracted cancer later in life after the fact. If only. I've lost an uncle, a niece, a brother-in-law, and my father-in-law had cancer. He didn't die of the cancer, but probably the effects of the treatment that it had on him. I have an aunt that's now in remission and an uncle that is dealing with it right now. The question is, why does God let this happen? Why did God allow COVID or a lot of other disasters that we see, earthquakes, floods, wildfires, tornadoes? Why does God allow these things to happen? Why does God allow cancer to come to good people? Well, I've got a short answer. I don't know. I really don't know. I just know we live in an imperfect world where bad things happen. And God doesn't keep those bad things from happening to us. but God is with us when we go through those things. I remember I was at a Ministerial Alliance meeting, about 20 years ago or so. The disaster coordinator for the county came by and was telling us about the emergency preparedness they have for different scenarios or different things, and what they were doing to prepare for that, and what we as pastors in the community what our role might be. And he said, in case of a disaster, tornado, trains went through town, and said, in case, these trains carry hazardous materials in case of a derailment. That sound kind of familiar recently? In case of a derailment, what were we going to do? Or a pandemic. And he said, it's not a matter of if these things happen. It's a matter of when they happen. Wow. Wow. We read that story, both Mary and Martha said to Jesus, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. Well, did Jesus have to be there? No. He healed people. In fact, there's one situation where somebody came and he just said the word and the person was healed. He didn't have to be there. As soon as he had heard that Lazarus was sick, he could have healed Lazarus right there and there where he was. But he didn't. So, it's kind of interesting that we have all these if-onlys in our life. We say, if only this, if only that, if only I'd done this, or if only I had not done this, things would have been different. But we can't get in a time machine and go back. If onlys are in the past, right? All we have the present that we deal with. A few years ago, I started a Bible study called Away in the Wilderness. Before we completed the Bible study, the COVID-19 thing started, and we had to quit getting together for a while. And we kind of ironic that we kind of went into a wilderness situation right when we were studying a thing about a way through the wilderness. Not only about the children of Israel going through the wilderness for 40 years, but other times in our lives that we are the wilderness periods. And we might say that we went through a wilderness time when dealing with the whole COVID-19 situation. And sometimes people going through cancer, waiting for their treatments and going through their treatments, waiting to see if they'll go into remission. It can be a wilderness time. You don't know which way to turn, what to do. But one of my favorite verses in the Bible is Romans 8:28. It says, we know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. It doesn't say that all things are good. It just said God works all things for the good. That somehow, even though bad things happen, God sometimes brings good out of it. Yeah. And maybe sometimes going through our wilderness experiences makes us stronger and appreciate things more. Back during the whole COVID-19 thing, somebody put on Facebook something to the effect of, well, we worshipped athletes, so sporting events ended. We worshipped celebrities, and they were no longer able to make movies so that we could watch them, or we weren't able to go to the movies and watch them. We worshipped the accumulation of goods and going shopping. We couldn't do that for a while. We worshipped the church building. And for a while, we were not able to even go into our buildings and gather for worship. Made us realize that worship doesn't necessarily just take place in the building, that we can worship God anywhere. Jesus brought Lazarus back to life. It's a good thing. But Lazarus didn't stay alive. He eventually died again, this time for good, physically anyway. Yeah. That was physical death. And we'll all die physically one day. But that's not the end. As Jesus told Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Yeah. And that's what's most important anyway. That there is something for us at the end of this life, that there is a place prepared for us, that Jesus goes there. In the meantime, we're going through this life and dealing with the if-onlys, one way or another. I'll quote the great theologian Red Green. He says, remember, we're all in this thing together. Yeah. We're here to help each other and to work together with one another, but also knowing that God isn't going to keep the bad things from happening to us, but He's here with us as we go through these things in life. Well, thank you for coming. Glad that you could be here, and might stop and think about that. You see that deer. Say, if only I'd hit the brakes sooner, or if only I'd seen that deer earlier. If only. Well, we know that God is with us. Help us, guide us, and lead us today and every day. Amen. Thanks for coming.